Okay, I think we'll make a start then. Tony, if you're all right to do a welcome page. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Pete Jeffries. I'm Deputy County Commissioner for Berkshire Scouts, and we've kind of got this evening together to be able to cover across hopefully quite a useful set of information for you guys that will be useful. So we'll kind of do a little bit of run through in a background in a second. I'll then, thankfully for you guys, you don't have to listen to me. I'll sit back and hand over to Tony Phillips, who's on the call there with the gorgeous sunset in Uganda behind him. He is just sat on the Wokingham Road in Reading, but I think that's from last summer, just to make us all feel a bit jealous. So Tony's Group Scout leader at 73rd Reading in Reading Central, and was previously group treasurer and all sorts of things like that as well. So he knows his way around a lot of these systems and be able to share experiences there. And the other person doing a lot of the input tonight will be Mark Brunel Walker, who's Group Scout leader at First Crowthorne in South Berkshire. And again, Mark uses OSM to handle all of their gift aids claims and everything like that. So they'll be able to kind of give a different perspective on how to do it, different ways of getting the money, because that's basically what we want at the end of it as well. So we've got what is gift aid, some talk about the consent and what you need there, some bit about registering for gift aid, and I can see from some questions that we've had sent in beforehand that this is one of the stumbling blocks that people have had in the past as well. So we'll touch on that a couple of times. But really importantly then about making the claim, being able to put the things in, making sure that it all happens, and how we know that we'll be successful. And then, as I say, some time for question and answers at the end as well. Thanks, Tony. So in terms of kind of why we were here, a little bit of useful background setting as well. We know that as of January this year, about a quarter of Scout groups in Berkshire didn't claim gift aid this year or previously as well. So this was taken from the census. We know that in some cases somebody just answered the question wrong. In other cases they have been and they just haven't claimed this year. And in some cases where I've got in touch with people in the interim, they've made that claim in the last few months as well. They were just holding on to do a few bits and pieces as well. So all of this is a bit of a movable feast. We know from headquarters that the average claim for a Scout group in the UK is about £2,500 each year. Obviously it depends on how many young people you've got and those kinds of things. But if you kind of put those two numbers together, there's about £250,000 if you back claim 4 years. So about £250,000 of money sat in Mr. Sunak's bank account, waiting for Scout groups in Berkshire to go and claim their fair share of. So it felt like high time that we did a bit of kind of support to help people who want to do it. As I know quite a few of your emails came back to us and said, we want to do this, we just need a bit of help getting over the line as well. So that's hopefully what we'll at least start off tonight. A couple of other bits to mention really quickly. For those of you that have a rateable value on your property, assuming that you manage your own property, you hopefully should be aware of the Retail Hospitality and Leisure Grant. So most properties are eligible for the £10,000 rebate from your local authority. Some larger ones would have the higher amount. We know already that we're approaching something like £600,000 worth of claims of grants paid out to Scout groups in Berkshire alone over the last couple of months, which is a phenomenal amount of money. And so we've been quite keen in following up on making sure that people can get hold of that, whether it's used for your property or used to support young people in difficult financial positions or anything like that as well. It's then obviously for your execs to decide. For those who aren't eligible, don't own their own property, etc., each local authorities run a series of discretionary grants as well, which admittedly aren't entitlements. They're kind of
right.
But they're there and hopefully would be useful.
You're a bit late coming up.
So I've also popped a link in here as well that you'll get later on. So there's a page on the Scouts website about other sources of funding for local scouting, which is well worth looking at, a few bits and pieces in there. And they've run a webinar, which I think I've sent around to people before, about different sources of funding. Apparently it's £650,000 now. I've just had an update on a message there. So £650,000 for Scout groups in Berkshire, which is really, really good. Just wanted to give you a bit of context as well, Tony, on the next slide as well. So you can kind of see where this fits in to some of the work that we're doing coming up over the next year or so. As you'd expect, we've got a county plan in terms of supporting all the usual kind of strategic aims of the association. We've identified 6 kind of key areas that we want to be providing some quite rapid support on, particularly as people come out of lockdown and are working through these red, amber, yellow, green stages, and being able to plan for returns and things like that as well. So each of these will, over the next few months, be providing more and more support out to you through newsletters, websites, Facebook, etc. So support about adult volunteers if you find that some of your adults aren't returning or are finding difficulty in running things, perhaps for medical reasons. Some support around how you can make use of support materials there. Young people as well. Hopefully you kind of, I know lots of people have been keeping in touch with young people on Zoom, etc. But if you've got some young people that might not be returning or aren't comfortable coming back quite at the moment, what happens around there, how to engage with waiting lists, how to think about moving young people on between sections, because you know, even though the world feels like it's on pause, birthdays are still happening, so beavers are becoming cubs and so on, and some thoughts around that. A lot of work I think that will be coming out of the programme team in terms of what good programs can look like carry on online. I think we may be slightly drying up on ideas to use, and so any ideas that we can borrow from other places would be brilliant, as well as what on earth a cub meeting looks like if you're only able to have a small number there, or what kind of things you would do if you have got people there only in an open space, for example. Some support around meeting places, and I think this will be particularly interesting for those exec members amongst you. I know we've got quite a few chairmen, treasurers, etc. on the call, in terms of all the risk assessments that you would want in place, so that your buildings can be ready for people to come back and use. We've got some work around mandatory issues, so making sure that we're up to date with things like ongoing safety, safeguarding training and so forth, making use of the current kind of pause in activities to make sure that we're ready to go with that as well. And then finally, which is where this one kind of fits in, is around finance as well, and signposting people towards support that's available, putting on sessions like this one, being able to put people in touch with each other, and provide those kind of financial support, so that if groups are finding it difficult in any sort of way, we might be able to provide some guidance as well. So just to give you a bit of an idea, you'll hopefully see some more coming out about this in the next couple of weeks and months, but I just wanted to give you an idea about how this kind of fits in with some of our work as well. Thanks, Tony. Okay, I'll hand across to Mark to take us through the introduction to what Gift Aid is.
Great. And so just before we move on to the slides, as a little bit of context, I've been GSL for, I think I'm coming up to the end of my 3rd year. And when I joined First Crowthorne as a leader, first in Cubs, one of those original conversations of, yes, we have a space for your child. By the way, we have a vacancy for a leader. One of the things that we looked at was how do we get our finances back in order. We had subs that weren't being claimed. We had lots of challenges around just kind of the housekeeping piece. And it was back at a time when Online Scout Manager was beginning to grow quite fast. And we jumped on board, started with Cubs, moved it to Scouts, moved to Beavers, and now it's the kind of the de facto standard for us across all of our group. In doing it, we've kind of moved our subs to about 100% collection. I think we've got one person who hasn't paid for this term yet, and we manage that through all of our Gift Aid donations and everything else. Our Gift Aid management comes through it. So what you're looking at tonight with myself and with Tony is slightly different perspectives on how Gift Aid works in each of our 2 different groups. But it's really, the purpose of this is to kind of help you. It's not to scare you, and it's not to go through this. The handouts that we're going to give you later on after this have a heck of a lot more detail in it, and they have considerably more slide content than we're going to show you tonight. So what we're not going to do, or what I'm not going to do, is take you on a slide-by-slide, step-by-step process on how to register. If I did that, it would take 1 to 2 hours, and everyone wouldn't have the information. But the follow-up is really good, and that's thanks to the great work at the Greater Manchester Scouts as well. Tony, can we move on to the first slide? it might be a really obvious question. It might be a really obvious thing, but actually, what is gift aid? Some people don't claim it, some people don't claim it fully, and I'm going to come on to an example of some of this later on. But it's basically, for us, free money. It has to be paid for by, when you're claiming it, it has to be by people that are taxpayers or pay capital gains tax. But effectively, for scout groups, for us and for other charities across the country, it's just a way of accessing top-up funding and free funding that comes from HMRC that's been paid for through donations or been paid for through the tax work that people do. Started way back in 1990. It's a lot older than people think. And over the course of a time, if you think about how many large charity events have happened, how many claims, you're looking at probably billions of pounds that have been given back. Children in Need, Red Nose Day, all of the large-scale appeals all benefit from this, and everybody can. But you don't need to be a charity to do this. You don't have to be a registered charity. It seems to be one of the biggest myths. We're not registered with a Charities Commission. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But at its basic level, for every £1 of qualifying income, it means you can claim back effectively another 25p on top. And now for us, I've said it's First Anytown, but that this is actually First Crowthorne. So when we last looked at this, we had 150 members. We charge £120 per annum for subs, about £10 a month. That figure includes capitation. Gift aid gives us another £30 per person. For us, that's £4,500 a year. That's the average size of our claim. And we only claim one side of the gift aid, and I'll come through that in a minute. So an average gift aid of £100, actually with gift aid, £125. How long does it take you to get a parent to sign up for that? Minutes. Go to the next slide, Tenny. So there's a bit of a build on this one. So who can you sign up for gift aid? Gift aid is basically eligible. You can sign people up as long as they are, as long as it's an individual. So you can't claim gift aid on a company. The donor, the person, the parent must have paid the same amount or more in income tax or capital gains tax in that tax year. So what does that mean? So if someone has earned £20,000 a year, they're fine. If someone has earned £5,000 a year, as long as they've earned more or paid more in tax than they're trying to pay as the donation element of your payment, you're fine. But the benefit of this is actually all of the onus of responsibility pretty much sits on the parent when they're signing up. So when you're looking at the forms, and Tony will run through some of this, I won't steal his thunder, but parents have to, or the donor has to sign up to say, yes, I qualify. When you go on to Just Giving, when you go on to BT Donate or any of the other giving platforms, on the gift aid, it will always ask you, are you a taxpayer? Have you paid tax? And it puts the onus on the donor to kind of sign up for that. They must have created a gift aid declaration. So it's very difficult to kind of go back in time. If you don't have a form, you can't make a claim. And the two different systems that you'll see later on will show you that's quite simple. But effectively, it's £1.25 worth of value for every pound that you get. They must pay tax. They must fill in a form. And that's pretty much the two main things that you need to do. And actually, when it boils down to it, they need to fill in the form. And once they've filled in the form, doesn't matter if you're using OSM or a manual system, once they've filled in that form, then the rest of it will flow through quite logically. And all of that work sits on the side of the donor. Next bit. What you can claim gift aid on is actually a very, very wide selection. And I just want to put a word into people's head just to think about this one of Smarties. So just keep thinking of Smarties and think of tubes of Smarties. Biggest thing for us, for any group, is the membership fee that they pay, our subs, our annual subs. Now, if you pay capitation as a separate invoice, you can't claim gift aid on kind of that element. But on the total amount of money, if you charge a sub that includes all of that, you can claim gift aid on the whole lot. And that's what we do every year. We blend the capitation fee into our subs over the course of a year. Sometimes there'll be wins, sometimes there'll be loses, but generally speaking, it works out well for us. If there's any subscription fees that adults pay for anything, basically any payment of a membership or subscription fee from anyone is gift aid claimable. General donations from parents. How many people on the call tonight have gone out to parents during this pandemic and said, help, we need money, or we're not going to ask you for subs, but we do want to ask you for donations? All of those count as well. And then other things, volunteer expenses. Now, I'm quite fortunate that I get mileage for my car, I get petrol for my car, and so I will kind of go through the process now of claiming that back from the Scout Association, from my group, fill in an expense form, I get sent the check, and then immediately I donate that money back to the group. Now, if I do that, then the group can claim gift aid on my donation back. If I just turn around to my group and go, actually, I don't want to claim it, then they can't claim gift aid. It has to be actual money transferred from a person to the group. So donations, if you don't claim your money, if you don't claim your expenses, and the cash flow of your group permits it, it's a very easy way of starting to add more and more and more to your pot. And then charity auctions as well. Everything that you do that has a charitable element where there's no mandatory requirement. So you can't say, make me a £20 donation and you can have a ticket for this event. And we'll come on to that in a second as well. And then finally, bag packs and bucket collections. All of these things you can do as well, but just keep thinking of the Tube of Smarties for a minute as we go to the next bit. What you can't claim it on, actually there's very little you can't claim it on with Scouts. We're quite lucky with most of the work that we do is it will fall into the category. The big examples are you can't claim it for goods and services. So if you pay your Scout leaders to come round and clean your car once a week, providing it's a donation, you probably could. But generally, if you sell a tent to a parent or surplus equipment to a parent, you can't necessarily claim the gift aid back on that. However, with eBay and charitable donations via eBay, there are always ways around that. You can't claim it on camps and activities as standalone. So if your big group camp or your big summer camp, you can't claim gift aid on that. There's some creative thinking that's emerging about different ways of doing it, but effectively, if it says camp, you can't claim it. If you get a company donation, doesn't count. If an individual in a company makes a donation, that's claimable. But if it's from Blogs Electricals, it doesn't count, unfortunately. And I think I've already said, payment received in for goods and services. So you can't have a donation for admission to a concert or for a sponsored challenge. If you're doing a sponsored challenge event, and I'm doing a sponsored parachute jump later on this year for my sins, I'm quite well insured, thank God for that. But if you're doing a sponsored parachute jump, you can claim the gift aid on the element of the gift aid on sponsorship, but you can't claim the gift aid on the money I'm giving for the fee. You can't claim it for minimum donation. So there are lots of groups and lots of organisations that have gone, we'll have a fundraising dinner and it's a £50 donation and in return you get a ticket. If you go to Kew Gardens, if you go to Historic Royal Palaces, if you go to any of those other places, they'll ask you if you want to convert your membership or your ticket price into a donation. And you'll notice that the figures are never the same. So you'll never give the same amount. So you actually end up giving more money to the charity, which benefits them more. And then gift aid. So, sorry, charity vouchers and charity checks. You can't claim the gift aid on that. Just because of the way that scheme works. And then payroll giving. So if through your company you can give to charity through payroll, that impacts you because it comes off your tax, but it doesn't have a benefit for us as a charity because the tax hasn't been paid on that money. So really, it's simple to claim. Get a form signed, get a box ticked. You can claim it on membership, and even if you only claim it on your membership, you're in a much better place than you are now. And then over time, you can worry about the rest. And then just think about the big things that you can't claim gift aid for. So camps, donations from companies, selling equipment, charity vouchers, and for direct giving. Go to the next slide. Just conscious there. So you remember I said about Tube Smarties. So when is a tube of Smarties not a tube of Smarties? Well, as you all know, if you take a tube of Smarties and fill it with 20p coins, you can get about 12 pounds of 20p coins into each tube that you fill. That's great. That's really good. The second part of gift aid is something called the small donation scheme. Now, this is easier in some respects. It's a little bit harder because you've got to keep some records. But that tube of Smarties, if everyone in your group fills a tube of Smarties with 20p, actually, through this scheme, that £12 tube of Smarties is now worth £15 because you can claim gift aid. You don't need a form, you don't need a declaration, you just claim it. And it's very, very straightforward. So you can also do, if you're doing a bucket collection or a supermarket bag pack, as long as none of the individual donations are more than £30, you can claim the gift aid back on that through the small donation scheme. And again, same value, every £1 gives you £1.25 back. So it's really easy to do. The majority of groups in the district will be claiming the first part of gift aid on membership and subs and everything else. Very, very few people claim this. And actually, Pete, Tony and I were talking before it, and neither Tony's group nor my group really claim this. And it's something that we'll need to go back and just talk to our team about. Be creative in your thinking. You can claim it on credit card payments and debit card payments now on contactless as cash goes out the window. This scheme's really easy. If you do a cash collection, if you're outside Tesco's and shaking the bucket or holding a bucket and asking people for money, when you count that up, you just need to keep a record of who you were there, so what store, what date, how much you raised, when you banked it, and break it down. How many £20 notes, £10 notes, £5 notes, etc., etc., etc. And that's it. That's gift aid. So gift aid on the membership on the left-hand side, the big stuff on membership, a little bit more paperwork for parents to do. The small scheme, and there's lots of information in the pack you're going to get, the small scheme is where you can also add a lot of value, and every pound is worth £1.25. So go fill your tube of Smarties, and when you've registered, turn it into more money. Tony.
Mark, that's great, thank you. Do you mind if I just jump in? We've had a question from Ian, which I think I've replied to in the chat box. Andrew has asked as well around the goods and services, Mark. So something like a charity auction, how could a charity auction count but payments for goods and services doesn't? And his particular example he was thinking about was a silent auction at their summer fair. I don't know if you know too much more about that or if we need to go away and look it up.
So basically the difference between the two is if I sell you a tent, then that's a good or service. If I have an item, so, you know, I have, I don't know, a bottle of WD-40, which I'm going to auction off at the end of this meeting. If I auction this off, then I've not had any cost associated to it. I've not had any value put into it. There's a small little detail about the retail value of this. So if I'm going to auction off a Lamborghini, I'm going to be stuck at the amount that I can claim back on some of those auctions to the value of the total claim. But effectively, if I've had this donated, or even if I bought it, because you're not actually buying the product, you're making a donation to acquire it, that's the subtle difference between the two. Charity auctions are great. If I sell you a tent, which is the goods and services, then that's a clear, I give you this money and you give me this back in return. It's a subtle but clear distinction. Does that answer the question, Andrew?
Yeah, that does. Cheers, Mark. Thank you.
And then, do you want to deal with Ian's? Oh, that's okay. I'll leave the.
Yeah, I think Tony's going to pick that one up as well. So, fab. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Just to sort of a bit of background for myself, I've been GSL at 73rd for about 5 years now. I did briefly act as treasurer. We had a bit of a wobble with the previous treasurer who had to drop out. So I picked it up. So I'm aware of how we've gone about this in the past. We're quite lucky. We are allied to the Park United Reformed Church in Palmer Park in Reading, and in fact they have helped us to get up and running with our gift aid, and it's been running for probably at least 15 years now or thereabouts. So it's been going for quite a while. And we continue to work with the chap who has helped us there. But increasingly, we're taking over more and more responsibility for the record keeping ourselves. One of those key records, and Mark's already mentioned it a couple of times, is this consent form. Fairly sure that you will have seen something similar. You may well have signed one for other things that you've been involved in. So let's have a quick look at what this actually means. And it's basically around the rules as to who can and can't claim The first one is one that Mark's already mentioned. The donor has to have paid the same amount or more in tax in the relevant tax year than you're claiming for. And that, as Mark also mentioned, was income and capital gains tax. So it's the total tax that they've paid. The donor has to agree to let you claim gift aid, and they have to make that as a formal declaration. So we're going to have a look at the ways that we can achieve that in a minute. But essentially, they are giving you permission to claim gift aid on any donations that they make to your group. This is an interesting one. This is quite important. You have to keep records. You have to keep information that the HMRC can see. Should they wish to come and audit you, they can ask to see what you've got. You have to keep the declarations in some form so that if you are audited, you can show for up to 6 years after the most recent donation. So for most groups, that's probably going to be as people leave, but it could be that if you have someone sign up as a diva, they may drop out of the group through the normal process, and you may end up having to destroy those records. I've got some thoughts on that a little bit later as well. You've got two options really to get hold of the declaration from the parents. The first one is to automate it using Online Scout Manager, and the second is to have your own manual gift aid declaration form. It's the latter that I use at 73rd, simply because that's what we've always done. And what's been quite interesting for me is, having looked into how the OSM side of things works as well, I'm beginning to think I might need to make a little bit of a shift across to OSM, because it doesn't half make some of it easier, as you'll see a little bit later. And this is the other key message, which Mark emphasised earlier as well. The responsibility for that first rule remains with the donor. They have to notify you of changes. And that's quite clearly stated on the template form, which we'll see in a moment. So let's have a look at the OSM way of doing it. It's dead simple. You do have to have a gold level subscription. My understanding is that where Berkshire Scouts are sponsoring that for us or paying that for us, you do get the gold level. So everyone should have access to this functionality within the system. It's also an HMRC approved system, so the OSM guys have been through the loop with the Inland Revenue to ensure that the information is kept in a secure way and they're outputting it correctly. First thing we need to do to get that declaration is quite simple. Go into your section admin, click on the gift aid, and up pops a gift aid box. And in this, you can choose the scout or scouts or members, young people that you want to request a declaration for. Then you click on the little thing at the top that says Ask Parents. That will then send out an email to the parents to say you are being asked if you could do the declaration for us. Next time they log into the parent portal, they will be prompted to complete the form. The declaration will basically be a pro forma, and they just have to tick a box and save. All done. You've now got that declaration in OSM. However, you can, if you wish to, continue to use a manual form, and you can enter the data into OSM so that you can use the OSM tracking features to generate the data that you need to make the submission later on. So let's have a look at that form, because either way, you end up with the same type of form. This is the form that I use at 73rd. It's one that I adapted from a combination of the HMRC and Scout Association templates. There are others available, but they all pretty much have the same stuff on it. So what I'm going to do quickly is just walk through the key elements on this form. The first one is you have to have your charity name. This is a declaration by the donor to say that they are happy for a given charity to claim for gift aid. They have to say who they are. You need name, initials, surname and title. Those are important. As you'll see later, you have to put that information on the claim form that you submit to the HMRC. So we've got a sample in there. We need their home address. That's more for your records. but you do need the house number or the house name. That is a piece of information you have to submit, along with the postcode. And obviously they have to date and sign it. Now, the interesting thing is that once they've dated and signed it, you can use that form and you can claim back for up to 4 years. It's not a forward thing. You have that declaration. So if you've got a bunch of members who've paid, or parents who've paid for young people for the last 3 or 4 years, if you get that declaration today, you can go back and claim retrospective amounts, which is quite useful. We did one a few years back. I think we got about £7 grand, just to put that in context. They need to tick the confirmation at the top, and the other thing they need to fill in is the initial donation. So what I normally ask parents to do is to simply put the subs for that term that they're signing the form in. So there we go. The other thing that I've added to this form, because it's really, really useful, is actually the donation or donations that a parent makes aren't for the individual. Sorry, they are paying for the individual subscriptions, but the donor is the person who is making the declaration. So one declaration can cover many young people if you have siblings within a group. And that's quite a useful thing to add to the form to track, because what it means is that you don't have to ask them to sign one each time. I have got some examples where parents have actually done that. So as a new young person joins the group, they sign another form for us. So I've got 2 or 3 for a family. But generally speaking, you can get away with just the one form. Templates are widely available. You can see the thing on the screen, hopefully, and you'll notice there's a couple of things on here. The most important thing is that little box next to the words gift aid, or the little logo that says, please notify the Scout group if you want to cancel the declaration, change your name or home address, and no longer pay sufficient income tax on your income or capital gains. So the wording has been taken from the templates, but that's the key message here. The onus is on the individual to tell you if things change. That being said, I have found that it is quite useful every couple of years to just do a quick sweep and make sure that you've got the right declarations in place. It's also really, really important to make sure you've got up-to-date address details. People move, they don't always tell you. So I think it's quite useful to maybe cross-reference with any membership records if you see people moving, because the person keeping your declaration records may not be the same person who is managing individual records for a young person. A couple of things on collating your declarations. The key to it is keeping the records. The HMRC can audit you if they wish to, so you have to be able to prove that you've got a signed declaration. I keep them in a paper file. It's just a lever arch. And you can see I just got a blank one at the front of the form there, and I just file them by surname of the donor, because it's the donor's name that would normally be the one that you would use in the audit. What I then do is I then transpose that data into a simple spreadsheet that I use to help me generate the claim. We were just before you all joined, we were chatting about this, and I said, I'm not going to turn this into an Excel class this evening. You can do some clever things with some of the functionality of Microsoft Excel to generate the form, but it takes a bit of thought, and I don't want to go through that now. But once you've got the basic information here, you can use that to cross-reference things. Okay, here's the bit that no one likes, GDPR. I think it's really important to stress a few things here. Gift aid requires you to process personal data for a number of data subjects subject being the donors. You are keeping a record that's got their name, you've got their address, you've got the name of the young people. There's quite a lot of sensitive information there. So please be mindful of that in whatever way you record and store this information. As with all information, the group exec remains the data controller. If you do use OSM and you put this information in there, they become a third-party processor, and they are then acting on behalf of your group exec for you. That's perfectly fine within the GDPR rules, not an issue. ensure that your group data retention policy, I hope everyone has one, is quite clear that if you hold gift aid forms, that you will be holding that data for 6 years for HMRC reasons. The government, HMRC, require you to hold that information. People need to know that you are keeping it. After 6 years, you're perfectly entitled to go away and delete it. They can't audit you for that old information. But it's 6 years after that you make that last claim for that individual donor. And remember, please remember that that has to include any backup files, if you scan forms into an electronic form, and any paper copies of forms. Really important that you get rid of all of it. Otherwise, you might end up paying a fine that undoes all the good you claimed on gift aid. And finally, this is probably a general rule anyway, if you are going to share the spreadsheets, it could be that someone else is putting data into it for you. Don't transfer anything that's got sensitive data in it in an unencrypted form. Sending an email of a spreadsheet with a spreadsheet attached could potentially be intercepted, and you're dealing with information that is sensitive, so don't do it, or at least use the encryption capabilities of Excel, for example. Okay, so Pete, were there any questions through that section that we want to pick up?
Yeah, there's just, I was going to say just one, and the second one flew in. So one, I think Mark has picked up around the consent. So Neil was asking about the consent that they have on the bottom of their standing order form. So they tear that off and keep it. So they only have a signature on the declaration form with the address, etc., kept on Excel. Would that cause them a problem with claiming? Mark's gone back initially and said it depends on what information is on the torn off bit, but you should be okay. So I guess you just need to capture the right amount of information that you were seeing on your form, do you?
From my understanding, yeah, it's ensuring that you've got the right amount of information. That the form is an HMRC template, so if it is worth doing that. We used to have a simple declaration box as part of the general sign-up pack, and it was a paragraph that said, "Do you want to give? Are you happy to declare a gift aid? Yes, no." We went through a process about 4 years ago of making sure that we had the latest, most up-to-date form from the HMRC, and that's the form that you now see, that you saw a minute ago. So I think it's probably worth just making sure that you're covering every base by getting the correct form signed.
That's cool. That's great. Thanks, Tony. And a second one that came in, Rachel was asked about because they use OSM, and the question goes back, Mark, I think your example was gift aiding your mileage claims back as well. So presumably as a volunteer, you've signed a gift aid form as well to say that your donations can be gift aided.
Yeah, and also I've had children in the section as well. So my son's a young leader of the group for another 2 months before he becomes a leader. My daughter's gone through as well. So I've had a gift aid form in that covers the family. But yeah, if they don't have a young person, just get them to email the form through OSM.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good question. It wasn't something that occurred to me when you were giving your example. So thanks, Rachel, for picking that one up as well.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Tony, Janice has just asked about the 6 years since the last claim. That's a reference to tax years, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Generally speaking, you'd be claiming for a given tax year.
Okay.
The other thing to remember, of course, is if you claimed, let's say for example, if you claimed for 2019-20 for half the group, and then you suddenly got a flurry of retrospective gift aid forms, you could potentially claim for the unclaimed as well.
Okay. And is the 6 years, does that start from the date of the donation or the date of the claim?
It's the date of the last claim for a given donor.
Okay, so it's the last date of the claim. Cool, yeah. That's useful.
So if for example, if we take Mark's example, I think where he said his son's about to move to be a leader rather than a young leader, that sounds like someone's turning 18. In that case, you would be probably claiming gift aid on Mark's son for this term, but then from next term on, he's not paying any subs anymore. So you'd have to wait for 6 years after the claim for that. However, in Mark's case, I think he's also going to be putting in his little donations from his mileage claims. So that would carry on anyway. But that would be the sort of thing. So it'd be when someone leaves, typically it's going to be that tax year that you would be the last point you claim for an individual.
That's cool. Yeah, thanks,
Tony.
Tony. Cool, thank you. Two more that have come in. One I think I can answer, and one I think I'm okay with, but I'll double check with you. So, Tony, you mentioned about data protection and not sending unencrypted files around on email, for example. If a group stored things on OneDrive or on Google Drive or anything like that, and everybody just accessed the one version, then that's all encrypted as well, so they don't need to worry about that. So long as people aren't emailing sort of offline copies, that'd be fine, wouldn't it?
And the password for the account isn't the password.
Sure. And the other one is that if leaders donate their expenses back to the unit, do you actually need to give them the money and they give it to you back, or can you just do it internally? I think, Mark, you answered that earlier. The money actually needs to change hands, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's physically got to be money that leaves the Scout account that comes to you as a leader, and then you physically make a donation back to the group. It's perverse, but there you go. Again, free money.
That's cool, brilliant. Thank you for those questions as well. Really good to pick them up while we're thinking about those as well. That's grand. Mark, I think we're back to you for registering for Gift Aid.
Yeah, I'll try and rattle through this so we have some more time for questions at the end. I wanted to make this kind of picture flashy and bulge and kind of, do all the funky stuff, but actually the key message of this is don't panic. Don't panic, you'll get through it. Don't panic, it's not massively complicated. And what we'll send to you after this is, again, from the Greater Manchester Group, is actually a step-by-step guide that will show you exactly what you need to do and when and how. And if you follow that information, if you follow that through, it will take you through the process. Now, what I would say is there are some people, and there's a couple of questions already that have come in before, about people who have inherited a group and they don't know who the treasurer was, or the people who've moved on. And in my own group, when we took over and we had a change of treasurer, it took us 6 months to make the change happen because HMRC didn't help. There's a form that you can fill in about changing your details. If you know the tax account information that was used, the actual login information, using the government gateway ID, if you know that, it's easy. If you don't know that, there's a form you can fill in. It's called a CHV1 form. I can send you all the link to it. You fill it in, you sign it all off, you send it off. Takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get them to turn it back to you, and it's actually quite straightforward. Then it will also show you what you need to do for the next steps. But this is really simple. And so again, I'm not going to tell you through this step by step by step. This is something that OSN can't actually help you with initially. The first part is you've got to gather all the information together. Then you register. Tony's already talked to you about asking parents to complete, and then you submit at the end. Tony's going to talk to you about submission after this, and I'm just going to take 5 seconds to run you through pretty much step 1 and a little bit of step 2. There is plenty of help around if you need it. There's a dedicated team at headquarters. I'm not sure how many of them are around at the moment through furlough, but effectively email fundraising@scouts.org.uk and somebody from that team will be able to get back to you and ask any specific questions. Or, my details will be around. I'm happy to help anybody. And then there's actually a specific number for HMRC if your chat questions are technical. But the moment, time scales to get through to HMRC are very, very hard. If you are not a charity, don't worry. Not every Scout group is a charity in their own right, but we are all, through our charter, exempted charities. So you don't need to be registered as a charity. You will be able to still make a claim, and I'll talk to you briefly about that. If you're expecting me to go through this step by step, you might be a little disappointed, as it would have taken another 2 hours. Tony, can you go to the next slide for me? The key thing is to actually gather all of the information you're going to need to register. If you get all of this right in one place at one time, it will make it'll make the whole process a lot easier. Obviously, you're going to need your bank account details and some financial information. A copy of your last accounts will be good. HMRC wants the officials' details. Now, actually, that's pretty much just the trustees, sometimes members of the executive committee, but generally it's the trustees as per the Charities Commission if you're registered, or members of the executive committee elsewhere. You'll also need their date of birth, their national insurance number, and their address, but gather that information. The registration number that you'll be asked for, if you have registered with the Charities Commission, you will have your Charities Commission number. That's what that's for. If you don't have a number, don't worry. Slightly different form you need to go through, slightly different process, but effectively it gets you to the same place. The key thing is you don't need to be a registered charity to claim gift aid or register for gift aid. Charity objectives, straightforward, POR. The purpose of Scouting is our charitable objectives. And then the governing document is again, very straightforward. If you have your own constitution, it's that. If you don't have your own constitution, it's basically chapter 3 of POR, and that will explain how we work. It's really simple. Get that information in one place to get it together, and then we can move to the next slide, and we'll just go through the next little bit from here. Give yourself plenty of time, okay? If you haven't registered before, so this is a completely new registration. If you haven't registered before, you will need to allow about 1 to 2 hours to make this work. So get the information, grab a cup of coffee, make yourself comfortable, about 1 to 2 hours. Let's deal with the charities. Not every group is registered. It's a very simple process. You can still claim everything. You can still do this. But if I had £10 for everyone that said we have been told we can't claim because, then I'd remember that I can claim that through the small donations program. But actually, it doesn't matter. Just claim it and follow the process through. The start of this is gaining charity recognition. And the link that's on here, which backs up with the 40 slides that we'll send you after this that take you step by step through the process, actually, that will take you all the way through. Whether you're a registered charity, whether you're an exempted charity, it makes no difference. The one piece of advice I would do, and some of you on the call may have your own HMRC portal accounts already, if you do your own tax returns or self-assessment, if you have your own business, if you're self-employed, you'll have your own account. When you're doing this, take the lesson that I learned, use a different email address when you're doing your HMRC tax account for Scouts. Use a Scout one, use a generic one, but use a different one. Because when the time comes for you to move on and you're trying to pass the account to somebody else, you don't really want them having access to your tax portal with your tax password and your username. And that's really it. It's so simple. It will take you about 1 to 2 hours. Now, the exceptions to this, if you've already registered before and you don't know who the people are or they haven't given you the details, you need to do a step in advance of some of that, which is the CHV1 form. But actually, by filling in that form, you bypass about an hour's work from here on in. I can see there's a question about the Explorer unit with a district. You can't claim under the charity number. I'll just come to that one in a sec. You cannot use district or county or HQ charity numbers. Right? They are charities in their own right. If you're a group that's qualified to get this, the exempted charities, so in the case of the Explorers, you're an exempted charity, you can claim through this process, register and move on because we're part of the charter that we've got. You do not have to, you must not, absolutely must not think, I'll just use the Scout Association's charity number because that's the road to hell. And actually, you don't need to do it. So don't think you need to do it. To the Explorer unit, if you don't have your own charity, just follow the process through on the next couple of handouts and it'll be straightforward and done. And that's it. I wanted you to just know this isn't hard. It's going to take some time, but it's not hard. And don't panic. There are so many advice and guides around that will help you. And that's
just to jump in on that one on Explorers, I think because the HMRC recognises charities and it asks you for your trustees, etc. Explorers would need to claim it as a district, wouldn't they, rather than individual units or anything like that?
I apologise. Yes, it's the trustee status. So if it's registered at the district with the trustees, it would be the district level, but it will be district level Explorer as opposed to the district of the Scouts.
There is another angle on the Explorer one, which is if an Explorer unit is allied to a Scout group, it could well be that the group could claim for that Explorer. I mean, we do at 73rd. We have a signed arrangement agreement between us and the Explorers, and we claim their gift aid for them.
Yeah, good point, Tony. Your partnership agreement should speak about finances as well, as long as somebody is claiming them, and you don't want to be double claiming or anything like that as well. Yeah.
No.
Mark, I had a message from Emma asking, you made mention about the putting a national insurance number and dates of birth. Do you know if that's for every member of the exec you need to declare, or just treasurer and chair?
It's whoever you put down as the trustees. So your trustees, you just need to get that information from them. It's the piece of work that when you look at the Charities Commission site, if you're registered for that, it's those guys or those people. It's the ones that you want to register as your officer. So effectively for accepted charities, it will be chair, treasurer, GSL, and that's it. Please make sure you have at least 2 or 3 people that you register.
I was going to say, is it better to have more people? That sounds prudent.
3 is good. 3 to 5 is probably good. I think we put 3 trustees down. But yeah, 3 to 5 is probably the right number. It gives you some flexibility and freedom. If someone drops out quickly, you don't have to then worry about changing everything because you've got at least continuity of coverage.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you. It's always good with signatories as well, isn't it? That's what I was kind of thinking about.
Yes.
Making sure that bank mandates don't go missing. I think we've all experienced that as well. Speaking of which, Malcolm's just asked us about bank accounts. Group recently changed bank accounts. Any tips from either of you, or bitter experiences, scars to share perhaps, on how to change the bank account through your HMRC online account? Is that sort of fairly simple or quite painful?
No, really easy. We've just done that with us. Once you've got the access, once you've registered, once you've got your kind of portal details, piece of cake. Very, very simple to change online.
Brilliant.
Like 2 minutes.
Brilliant.
Probably also worth just double checking if you are about to make a submission. Just double check the account is up to
Yes.
date.
Very good point, Tony.
Don't want to pay somebody else.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I think we're on to the next section then. Guys, keep the questions coming and we will pick them up as we go. That's really helpful. Thank you. Making the claim.
Yeah, so we're going to go on to making a claim now. I will step through a few screens because there are a few salient points that I'd like to pull out. I will whiz through them as quickly as I can. I think the thing to remember here is we've gone through the hour and a half of registering with HMRC. We've got lots and lots of lovely declarations from our parents. We've got a wedge of subs that we know we can claim against. So now we have to make the claim. So is it time to panic? Simple answer is no, don't panic. Still don't panic. If you follow the methodical steps, it's actually quite straightforward. There are some little nuances that we need to be aware of, but actually it's pretty simple. So the first and most important thing is that the submission is done through something called the Gift Aid Donation Schedule. HMRC provide a template for this, and here's an example of what it looks like on screen. This particular one I downloaded a couple of days ago. This is just a blank one. Here's a couple of the wrinkles that we need to be mindful of. This form has to be submitted in something called ODS format. That is an open office data structure. Open Office is one of the open source pieces of software that you can get. The good news is that the current version of Excel that you get with Office 365 does work with ODS documents. However, older versions of Excel might not. So if you're still running an old version, you need to think about that one. Apple Numbers doesn't work. I've tried it. It genuinely just fails. You can get an open document compatible program. For example, there are something called LibreOffice, which is available for the Mac and Windows, NeoOffice for the Mac. They're all open source, aka they're free. So you can get hold of a spreadsheet that will work with these structure, this file structure. It's just what the government have put in place, or HMRC have put in place. When you've got the form, and when you're at a point where you can start to fill the data in, the form can only take 1,000 donations or rows per schedule. If you put more in, it will truncate it. It will simply ignore them. So you could end up losing out. But the good news is you can submit multiple schedules, and you can submit multiple schedules each time you log in. So if you've got 1,600 donations to claim for, split it 1,600 or maybe 2,800 or something like that. Just make sure that you don't get around that 1,000 line just in case you lose one. You can complete the form manually. You have to collect all of your donation information together, and you can add it into the schedule, and we'll look at that in a moment. The small claims are also put into this form, but what you do is they're done in an aggregate form. So where Mark was talking about your Smarty Tube collection, you might have 10 Smarty Tubes with £12 each, so you've got £120. So your total claim is 120. You just give it an aggregate name of, say, Smarty Tubes or something like that in the form, and then that gets added into the claim. OSM does quite a lot of this for you, but it won't do the aggregate donations. It will do anything that you have entered data for into the OSM system, so it will generate that. So manual claim, it's pretty simple stuff. For each donor that you are claiming for within a given tax year, you need to give the title, their first name, last name. You need to give the house number or name, the postcode, when they made the first donation. So if it's, maybe you've taken, we take subs termly, it would be the earliest date of payment in the tax year that you're claiming for, and then the amount. That's it, dead simple. All you do is that. So the work behind the scenes is probably something for your treasurer to do, perhaps, to give you that aggregate information for a given donor and say, right, in this case, Mrs. Scout has paid £150 in this year, and the first payment was made on the 23rd of the 6th, for example. The small collections, as I just mentioned, name of the collection, the donation date, and the amount involved. The spreadsheet will calculate the total for you, so you can see the total donations there, just sums up what's underneath it. One thing you do need to be aware of is they also ask you to put in the earliest donation date, which you have to put in by hand, so you have to find what it is. So it could be, depends what order you list the information. I generally list the information in alphabetical by surname when I do it. If you use OSM, the good news is that it's pretty straightforward stuff. You can go into the gift aid page on OSM, click download, and then click download HMRC spreadsheet. It'll ask you to pick the date range that you're interested in. Click generate, and off you go. It's as easy as that. Now, obviously behind that, there's the process for getting the information into OSM in the first place. And I'm not going to go into that now, but all I can say is that once the data is in OSM, it is that simple to get you that spreadsheet. Okay, so now we're ready to submit. We've got ourselves a nice shiny ODS document with all of our donors' information adding up. So this is where we're going to walk through very quickly how we submit. We have to log on to the government gateway, so we log in. We go through this claim back tax on donations link, which takes us into beginning the make a charity repayment claim. Again, there's a link to click on. What you're doing here is you're kicking off a workflow which takes you through the steps. The first step is to fill in the claim details. And again, you're just doing a very simple selections from the list. You are claiming gift aid, yes. Are you claiming UK tax deducted from other income? No. And so on. So you just answer those. The one thing that's here that's interesting is you can put in a claim reference. If you are making multiple claims, it may be useful to just put some reference in there that's unique to this particular claim to allow you to tie it back. So when you've got your financial records, the treasurer knows what's going on. Next one is to actually submit the schedule or schedules to the HMRC. So now what we do is we say which organisation we're dealing with. Are we dealing with the Charity Commission? We have the option in here to say whether or not we have a charity number. Leave that blank, please. Don't get into a mess. A little bit of contact information, just in case they have any questions, and they may find that there's a discrepancy or something and they'll get back to you. Finally, we attach the gift aid schedule. So this is just a case of clicking on that choose file, and it's much the same as you would have used if you uploaded files into a web system anywhere. you'll be asked to follow the instructions to upload a file. If you have problems with a file, this is where they will appear. And this is going to be simple things like you have the wrong format for numbers. You might look at the form and think, oh, that's nice, it's got pound sign in front of all of my numbers. Well, they don't like that. They don't want pound signs in front. You need to make sure that the numbers are correctly formatted with 2 decimal places, those sorts of things. But they will help you. They will help you with it if you run into problems. When you've submitted, you'll receive an acknowledgement that says what you've done, and about 5 or 6 weeks later is the advice for the length of time it takes. You will get some money in the bank account. So whichever bank account you set up. The last time we did a claim, it took 3 days. Now that was a couple of years ago. I suspect the HMRC are otherwise busy at the moment, so it may take a wee bit longer. It depends how much of it's automated and what thresholds they've got for manual scrutiny of claims and how much is automated. So just to summarise on that one quickly then, get everything ready before you start. Get your schedule ready. This is a redacted version of a claim that I'm currently preparing. We tend to claim every couple of years. So this is for the 2017-18 tax year. And you can see the total donations come to £7,488. Adds up pretty quickly when you look at it like that. Log into the gateway, click on that claim tax back link, follow through that workflow, attach the schedule or schedules that you're submitting, and hit the submit button. Off you go. And then you can wait for that money to arrive. And if you remember at the very beginning, Mark said, for every £1 you get 25p extra. So there you go. For that 7,488 claim, we will get 1,872. That brings us up to a 9,360. That makes a big difference to our ability to keep our subs low. So it really is a bit of upfront work to set things up. Once you've got your processes in place, it flows through quite nicely, and you're going to get some nice big sums of money coming in to help your groups. A couple of useful links for you, which will be in the deck when we share it. Scout Association guidance on gift aid, and the HMRC gift aid claim portal as well. And again, there's oodles of information there, lots and lots of help for people. There we go. In theory, it really is that simple.
Tony, thank you. There's a load of information there. I know we've dealt with quite a few questions throughout the chat box as well, and thanks to Mark for jumping in and answering those. I think so far all of the questions that we've had, we've cleared off. I'm conscious that a few people might have sent things in beforehand, or might still have a thought in their a sort of burning question in their mind. Feel free to use the chat box, or if you'd rather just unmute yourself and we can talk there. Whatever people would feel most comfortable with. We will be sending this out on email shortly later. So if anything occurs to you, feel free to come back to me as well, and then I can point your direction off to somebody who actually knows the question, knows the answer. Sorry. Question from Janice. Feel free to unmute yourself, Janice, if you've got a question about a donation you just mentioned there.
Yes, please. Sorry. It's quite a niche question, but we had a unique set of circumstances this year, in as much as a company made us their nominated charity for a product sale that they were having. And so what happened effectively is we turned up, set up a little bucket. The company was the company was giving away their samples to effectively their employees who walked past our bucket and dropped money in. There might have been, I wasn't there on the day, so I guess I need to ask the question as to whether or not there was a suggested minimum for what they were selling, but it netted us towards sort of £6,000. So my question is really, is that a company donation, or does that not count as a donation from the company because it didn't go through the company's books? Can we treat that as a sort of small bucket collection?
Mark's nodding at you.
Yeah,
I think
it's as long as it's I mean, you have to assume that probably some of the payments were more than £30. But effectively, you could claim that as long as you can demonstrate that it was reasonably, everything was below £30. Then yeah, it's fine. That would count as a small. But you don't need declarations. It's individuals putting the money in. Go for it. It's an extra. Oh God, can't work. And an extra £1,500.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's probably worth trying. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. It's really good example as well. I'm sure others might well be in a similar position, so it's always good to have a kind of case study there. Marissa's asking a question about a raffle store. Mark, I think this goes back to your kind of product benefit thing that we were talking about earlier. Can we claim money raised from a raffle stall?
Not easily, because it's a raffle, it's where, because they're buying a ticket and they are getting a game of chance back from it. It's one of those. If they were saying, I don't know, put £1 in the bucket and grab a couple of tickets, and you're not specifying how many tickets they can get for their money, then you can claim it. It's like you can claim for bucket donations as people walk into a fair or a fete, but you can't charge people £1 and then claim the gift aid on the £1, because it's a payment for. It's such a subtly different area, but unfortunately, no.
Okay, thank you. And Tony, maybe one for you as well about the your Uber spreadsheet that goes into the HMRC. Does it need to be sorted in any way, or will it just kind of take things however you like it?
The honest answer is I don't know. I have always tended to submit it with the sort order of alphabetical by surname.
I don't actually think.
I don't think
it makes a difference. I don't think the system's that clever.
Yeah,
your spreadsheet is, but I don't think the system is.
Hopefully that helps, Andy. Yeah, we don't think so, but it might be worth just keeping it in some sort of order anyway.
Can I just, on the questions that came in before, there's a question about the CHV1 form, which we've answered, and I've sent it out, and I'll put it into this deck. Someone else has asked exactly the same question in a different way. So we are set up for gift aid, but all the responsible people have left. I'm now responsible, but getting hold of HMRC guys at the moment, very hard. Fill in that CHV1 form, fill it in, print it off, fill it in, send it off. About 4 to 6 weeks time, you should get your details back. It's a little bit longer at the moment, but that's the same process, that same form.
Fab.
I think that's all of them answered.
I think that's all of them answered. I was just going through the questions we had beforehand. There were a couple of people around, and I think we touched on it earlier, but it's worth just clarifying as well. So if somebody has set up a previous tax account for the organisation, and we kind of don't know how to get into it, I think the advice was just you can set up a fresh account, can't you, rather than worrying about getting access to that one.
It depends. See, again, that starts off with that CHV1 form. It might be possible for them to just reset it and put you on and move you forward. If your details all match, they can do it. If they can't and it becomes too complicated, they'll just kind of delete it and you'll start again. Bit longer, but don't worry.
Cool. That's great. Thanks. Martha, you just mentioned that you've got a data protection related question as well. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Sorry, Peter. It's Stuart Webb. I had to change.
Sorry, Stuart.
I had to change computers because I couldn't hear you for the first 15 minutes, so I had to change onto a different login. Yeah, but I could see the lovely slides going along, and I was sort of just miming. But just a question very similar to what you started off with, Mark. I mean, we sort of have inherited a sort of a gap between the original treasurer. So she did the last submission sort of in 14-15. Unfortunately, the next treasurer went off OSM, but he kept all of the sort of information in Google. And then we went back onto OSM in sort of a year and a half ago.
Yep.
One of the questions we're rationalizing in our mind is, could we use the data that's in the Google Drive for people who have left? We haven't some of these people who are not, because your point, Mark, is right. We reckon we could have £8,000 to claim if we went for the whole lot.
go for the whole lot. B, as long as it's within that 6 years of the last claim date that Tony was talking about. It's an enduring, so gift aid is an enduring form until that 6-year period, etc. So you just do it. We had a similar problem. So we had OSM, we had forms. Our new treasurer went through everything. First of all, go into OSM and get everybody to fill in a form. That's half the headache. Next, if they're still here, you can go back, take your paper forms, cross-reference them off, go through them, make sure they're all in there, and add them in manually as well. That's good. Go back to previous terms. So if you used OSM 5 years ago, change the year, go back to that year where they were in the section back then, fill in the details of the gift aid back then, and it will forward date. But don't forget, you can only go back 4 years.
4 years,
of the actual.
But people who weren't on OSM, but we have the data for them, and have left. I mean, we're a bit.
If you know how much they've paid, and you've got a gift aid declaration for them, I think that's where Tony's spreadsheet. So I'm looking to my right, but I'm not sure it's the same here. So I'm okay that way.
Yeah.
No, but I suppose if we haven't got a form, and because we're thinking about how the point someone made earlier, we're thinking about we want to make a sort of a request due to lockdown. We've lost quite a lot of rent, etc. What's the view about using that data to go to people?
As in they've left and you don't have forms.
That's different. I think there's a couple of things here. If you have a signed declaration in some format, possibly a scanned copy of a form that they've signed at some point in the past, you can use that to claim for retrospective payments.
Yeah.
If you want to use their contact data to approach them to get them to sign a declaration for retrospective claims, I think you'd need to be careful with that one, because in theory you shouldn't be holding that personal data once they've left the group.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to double check that was our view, but sort of
I think that's an interesting one. Now there may be a few people who you still have personal contact with, and I've certainly done that in the past, where I've stayed friends with someone who's left, and I've gone to them and said, look, would you mind filling this form in? And they've very kindly done it. So I had a similar thing about 5 years ago where I had to play catch up because we were missing a number of forms. So we did that. And generally speaking, people are pretty good about this. They understand if you put it in raw terms, they're going to see that they're it's benefiting the scout group.
Okay. No, I think I just wanted to double check, and as Pete was on the line as well, I just wanted to sort of just rationalise it, and then we can sort of get going. I mean, I've been waiting to have this session really because we've collected quite a lot of data. I mean, Mark, you're right. I've spent probably 6 hours on the phone over the last 6 weeks trying to get to HMRC, because they just don't take the calls. They're not. They've got other things to do. So yeah.
Fill in the form if you need to change.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thanks.
That's cool. Thanks, Stuart. There's Rachel. You mentioned that you've got an exiting members query, which may be similar to Stuart's, or it might be slightly different.
Tell them my light.
Yeah, no, most of it's covered. So we only started as a group last year. Previous treasurer didn't do anything. I took over 10 days before lockdown, and I've been trying to go through all our gift aid. And we've had members that have left that have paid, and I didn't know if we'd be allowed to contact them. But I understand the GDPR. But what about when people have left? I've got a young person just gone over the age to Scouts, but their parents did a declaration. So am I still able to claim that?
Yes.
But I think our Scout leaders deleted them off. I think our Scout leaders deleted them off OSM, so I haven't got a paper trail.
You should still be able to go back to a previous term, and while you might not necessarily get the information. Now that's an interesting one. If they,
okay, I was going to ask why would they have deleted them off, but the gift aid should be in there if you go back to them last year.
Yes.
I'll have a look. With one of our leaders is very GDPR hot and has literally deleted everybody as soon as they've gone, and I'm like, well, hang on, I haven't done gift aid submission or anything, and these people have left. Welcome to my headache.
As well, the OSM support people are normally quite helpful as well. I know they're not properly deleted for a little while as well. They kind of go into a bit of a middle ground as well, so they might be able to help you with that side of things.
Perfect, thank you.
That's all right, no worries. Tony, a spreadsheet question from Andy. about whether you can have multiple entries for the same tax person. I think perhaps that's talking about a parent who's got multiple children, is it?
No, the simple answer is what they're looking for is a total amount that each individual donor has basically paid to the group in that tax year. I mean, the example I showed you was, I said it was, well, Mrs. Scout had paid £150. That was 3 terms worth of £50 subs, or it could have been 3 terms worth of £25 subs for 2 young people.
Yeah, they don't care.
The total donation made in that tax year for that individual donor.
So if we're going back 4 years,
yep,
do we need an entry for each year?
Okay, so generally the way I would approach that one, and the way I've done it, is that I normally do a spreadsheet per tax year, just because otherwise it does my head in, if nothing else. So I end up potentially, if you go back 4 years, you would end up with 4 separate documents, but it does at least mean that if you're audited or anything like that, you can show that information. And
if you're using OSM, no, just put the date back 4 years, run it, do it.
Yeah.
And it does it all for you.
Lovely.
Sorry, I'm quite a big fan of OSM.
Yeah,
I'm increasingly going that way.
Through a lot of, I'm trying to go back through 3 years worth. They've been using the Flexi records. So I've got, for some people, 12 entries. And for some people, only 1. So do I need the 12 entries going back 4 years, or just amalgamate them into 1? Fantastic.
You need to aggregate it for that donor.
Thank you very much.
What I would just say,
interrupting you, Pete.
What I would just say really quickly to everybody is, look, this is light touch. You're not going to go to prison if you put the wrong date on a form, if it's out by a month. This is not, again, it's easy. HMRC is not there to punish charities. They're there to help charities. If you're really kind of trying to screw the system, then it'll highlight. But for Scouts, we have a system, we have a process. Don't worry if you get it slightly wrong. Nobody's going to come and take your house away.
Thanks, Mark. I think we've probably got towards the end of the questions now, unless anybody wants to jump in. I'm conscious about people having a little bit of the evening light time going to themselves as well. So unless anybody else wants to jump in, Tony and Mark, I just want to give a huge thank you again to you guys. I think you agreed to this out of the goodness of your hearts a little while ago, and then as slide decks kind of unraveled, we realised quite a number of subjects we decided to tackle as well. But your perspectives coming at it really helpfully from different groups, one using OSM, one not as well, gives people a really good perspective about what to experience and how to go about things as well.
Happy to help.
That's brilliant. That's really, really helpful. And I've seen quite a few comments of people being thankful for your comments as well. So I'll pop all of the resources up on a web page a little bit later and email these out. And I've said at the bottom, I see Mark's given his email address in here, but I'll just say if anybody wants to come back to me with any queries, I can then either answer them or forward them on to other people who know much more than I do about it as well. But good luck, guys. I go back to that £250,000 that's sat there kind of waiting for Scout groups in Berkshire to claim from the last few years as well. So if we can do that to help out some of our halls and some of our young people and some of our kits and all of that kind of stuff, then just think about the impact that can have, and that's fantastic. So thank you guys all very much for coming along tonight as well. I know we've taken a touch longer than we wanted to, but some really good questions as well, so thanks ever so much for doing that as well, and hopefully speak to you all again soon.
Thank you very much.